Okay, we're going to get started. So if you could take your seats, please. Richard? So this is the final session, and the speaker is Jonathan CALVERT, who co-authored a book with Heidi Blake called The Ugly Game, The Qatari Plot to Buy the World Cup. OffshoreAlert over the years has held several sessions on corruption within FIFA, and Andrew Jennings, who's a BBC who's a journalist in the UK, several years before the recent FIFA indictments, Andrew exposed several of the people who were subsequently indicted at an OffshoreAlert conference. So Jonathan is going to tell us all about how the World Cup was awarded to a tiny country like Qatar. And Jonathan is the editor of the Sunday Times' very well-known investigations team known as Insight. So please welcome Jonathan to the stage. Thanks.
Hello. I'm Jonathan CALVERT. I'm the Insight editor of the Sunday Times. I guess you're probably familiar with the Sunday Times, and it's the Insight team. We've had a dedicated investigative team for about, I think it's 52 years now. Famously campaigned on thalidomide. At one point we exposed Kim Philby as a double agent. We also were the first people to point out that when we had the secret plans of the nuclear power station that was secretly being used by the Israelis to make their first nuclear bomb. And in the sort of 90s, and we had big political scandals like the Cash for Questions scandal, which I was involved in. It was one of my first stories at Insight. And we had Cash for Honours, which I think was one of the subjects of the talks just now. So that's the sort of work we do, and one of our pet subjects in the last 5 years has been this organisation, FIFA. You're probably all very familiar with it, as you know. Andrew Jennings has written a book. It was back in 2006. He wrote a book about it. And when we came to, just to let you know a couple of things about it, it's FIFA obviously has been going for 111 years. Essentially, like a lot of these sporting administrations, it's a sort of gentleman's club that got out of control, so that it sort of it keeps the ethos and the secrecy and the sort of the petty-mindedness and all those things of the gentleman's club, and at the same time, it becomes extraordinarily rich. A World Cup competition nowadays brings in FIFA something like £4 billion, and what FIFA do with that money is depending on who's the president at the time. At the moment, obviously, it's Sepp Blatter, and Sepp Blatter's main objective in life has been to keep himself in power. So what he does is he tends to spray the money in the areas where he's going to get votes. It's a well-known fact that FIFA is a very untransparent, non-modern organisation. You don't know much about it. You don't even know how much its president is paid. It's rumoured to be about 10 million. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we first came to it in 2010. At the time, there were two bidding processes going on for the 2018 and the 2022 World Cups. The vote was due to be held on December the 2nd, 2010. And FIFA unusually had held them two competitions together, which caused all sorts of problems because it meant that countries would trade between each other, one saying, I'll vote for you in 2022 if you vote for us in 2018. Although that was the least of the problems, because actually the reason we were interested was that England were one of the bidding countries. They were bidding for 2018. And we had a couple of sources who came to us from different routes who both said the same thing, that what was happening in the bidding process is that all sorts of bribes were being offered, that people's votes could be bought, etc. And when we first looked at it, there wasn't an awful lot to go on, really, because the sort of the 24 men who ran, and they all are all men, who ran the executive committee of FIFA, were all not particularly famous. They're far more so now, and partly because of all the corruption that's gone on since and the way that they've been exposed. And we did quite a lot of work trying to work out whether we could find out by conventional means what sort of bidding was going on and what sort of dirty deals were going on, etc. And in the end, we concluded that the way to do this was through going undercover. So at the time, I was working with Claire Newell, who's now the investigations editor of The Telegraph. We set up a false company, and we wandered around the world pretending that we were the lobbyists for a group of companies who were interested in promoting the American bid, as it turned out. And when we were doing that, it was quite extraordinary. Everyone we went to, and these were all people who were FIFA executive committee members or committee members from the past, or there were two others. One had been the former former general secretary of FIFA, which is sort of the second highest command after the president, and another was another FIFA official. And every one of them said to us the same thing. They said, if you're going to win a vote to host the World Cup, what you've got to do is pay bribes. And we have them all on camera. They all said this. And part of what we found, we also approached some of the voters, and two of the voters discussed what we could pay them in return for their vote. And this became this story here, which is World Cup votes for sale, now, which was quite a famous story ahead of the vote. It came out on October 17th, about 2 months before the vote. And as a result of that, FIFA suspended these two men. Reynald Tamari and Amos Adamu were suspended, and they weren't to vote, so the voting numbers went down to 22. And at the same time, what we did was we passed all the information to FIFA. I mean, I remember having to. FIFA were absolutely desperate to get it as soon as possible, and they sent somebody to Heathrow the day after we did the story, and we gave them all our tapes, which included all the 6 FIFA executive members, former executive members, are all saying you've got to pay bribes. It included quite a lot of interesting information. And what FIFA did with it was they threw the book at all of the people, suspended them, but didn't actually really investigate the allegations. And so one of the allegations that was in there, quite prominently, where we were talking to several people who were all saying the same thing, that Qatar, tiny Gulf state with no football infrastructure and temperatures too hot to play the football, were actually offering money in return for votes, and the only way in the end that we were able to get this out, because FIFA refused to investigate it, was after Qatar had won the World Cup and they'd taken the 2022 World Cup, was to go and submit the evidence to a House of Commons Select Committee hearing, which was looking into why England had failed so badly in the World Cup. it's very difficult to get the allegations out because they were sort of they were third party. It would be us talking to people on the tape who say they're also talking to somebody from Qatar who was offering them more money for their vote, and the amounts were in the order of around about 1.5 billion, 1.5 million each. We also were approached by a whistleblower who had worked for the Qatar bid, who made a similar allegation that she had witnessed payments be made to FIFA Executive Committee members. And so we put this all in a submission to Parliament because we got parliamentary privilege from it. And it wasn't a story that we necessarily ran, but it ran around the world, and everybody picked it up as a result. And it was the first real sort of doubt that was cast about the Qatar World Cup, and it started. Then very soon after that, a man called Mohammed bin Hammam, who was the Qatari representative on the FIFA Executive Committee, who was sort of a great stalwart and friend and protector of Blatter, stood against Sepp Blatter, and there was. And as you probably know, he was caught out paying bribes in the Caribbean and was suspended and later banned for life. And Blatter was re-elected. Out of all of this corruption came the FIFA decided it was time to reform, and they set up a new ethics system whereby you had two bits. They brought in an American attorney called Michael Garcia to be their investigative arm, and they also brought in a judge called Judge Joachim Eckert, who was to adjudicate on any matters brought to him by the investigator. And we kind of left it alone at that point. I mean, FIFA has been one of those stories that we dip in and out of, and we've had certain periods where we've done a lot, and we went off and worked on different things. And by this time, I had a new colleague, Heidi Blake, and roughly Insight itself is really just two people, so we're a very flat structure, and we're equals, and we work together. Heidi and I, the first FIFA story we did was that we were approached by somebody who was quite a sort of, who was connected to someone who was very senior in world football. And we were offered these documents. And what the documents showed was that the son of one of the voters, someone called Samson Adamu, who was the son of Amos Adamu, who was actually, as it happened, one of the people who had been suspended in our earlier investigation. But before he had been suspended, the son of Amos Adamu was offered $1 million to host a dinner in South Africa on behalf of the Qatari bid. It was to be called the Legends Dinner. And basically, the work we did showed that actually the dinner itself cost around about $200,000 to put on, whereas this voter, son of the voter, was being offered $1 million. It was a clear benefit, and it was clearly against the rules. When we put it to the Qataris, we had the draft contract, which showed that this deal had been proposed. The Qataris claimed that they decided at the last minute not to go ahead with it. And it still remains a mystery to this day as to quite what happened, because as a result of that story, it started the biggest investigation, I think, that FIFA has ever undertaken. Using their new ethics investigator, Michael Garcia, he started to look into this Legends Dinner story and quickly expanded it to look at all the 2018 and 2022 bidders. And it was an investigation that was going to take him 2 years. He was going to go round the world, and I think it cost him something like $5 million to do. And he was supposed to try and get to the bottom of find the truth in whether there was any corruption in the bids. Again, we sort of left it alone for a while. Early in 2004, last year, we received another call from our same source, who this time told us that he knew somebody who had access to just an absolutely enormous database of information which would be of interest to us. And we negotiated with him. He led us to somebody else, and then in the end, we were able to find a way of getting access to all this information. It was in order to access this information, Heidi and I had to go and live outside London somewhere. We called it the bunker, and we were there from, I think it was February through to June last year. And at the beginning, it was quite sort of, we would go home or back to our homes in London. But towards the end, we were there 7 days a week. The reason we had to be outside London was because the source was so worried that this information might leak. And also, we had to be in a place where we had the computer power to actually search these documents, because we were able to search them with quite sophisticated computer systems, which meant we could run word searches, and there were just masses. There were lots of emails, lots of documents, lots of air tickets of all sorts, and it was a great treasure trove of documents with Excel sheets, and we would, we would spend sort of 9 o'clock in the morning until probably 12 o'clock at night, just steadily going through them. And you can see, these are the pictures of us in the office here in the bunker. It wasn't very exciting living off takeaways and just spending all days at the screen, except that there is something very compelling about searching through this information, because occasionally you come across something and you think, my gosh, really, that's an incredible discovery. And what we found was an awful lot of information about this man. I mentioned him earlier. He is Mohammed bin Hammam. He is Qatar's top football official. He, for years and years and years, is the man who propped up Sepp Blatter's presidential campaigns until he fell out because Blatter reneged on his promise to stand down and not stand again. And what we could see was a huge amount of information about Mohammed bin Hammam that we hadn't appreciated before. Ostensibly, Mohammed bin Hammam was not involved in the Qatar bid. He said he was head of Asian football, so he told everybody that he would handle everything at arm's length and let the Qatar bid get on with it themselves. But in practice, the reason that Qatar won, and it's an extraordinary victory considering the compromises that have had to be made as a result of it, was because of this man and his relationships on the FIFA Executive Committee. It was also because of his payments. And what we could see was, through all our documents, we had all sorts of payment slips from his company, which is called Chemco. It's a chemical and electrical company, does all sorts of general sort of engineering type work. But he had about 10 slush funds in that company, and he was using it to pay football officials up and down Africa and in Asia. Some of them, he would make direct payments to FIFA Executive Committee members, such as Jack Warner. And this was the fund that he was using. And actually, he also used his daughter's account in the same company to make a lot of the payments. And this is the fund he was using to buy a groundswell of support for the Qatar bid. And so just before the World Cup last year in Brazil, which was sort of our deadline because we realized that we had to get it out before then. And so we were working very hard up to that point. We did the first of our big stories on FIFA from what we came to call the FIFA files. We actually did the first 11 pages of the Sunday Times on this one story, which is unheard of in times of peacetime, because that was how important we thought the information was. And what it quite clearly showed was that it recorded quite clearly all these corrupt payments that Mohammed bin Salman was paying. It recorded the fact that Jack Warner, for instance, had been paid $1.6 million, $400,000 before the bid, and $1.2 million to buy his silence after the bid. We found that Reynald Tamari, who was the other person who had been suspended as a result of our story, he had been suspended and wasn't going to be voting in the December 2010 election. So his federation, Oceania, wanted him to step to one side so that they could put somebody else in to vote. But at the very last minute, Mohammed bin Salman got hold of him and paid him 300,000 euros in order for him to carry on his legal fight against his suspension, which in effect meant that the person who would have replaced him wasn't able to vote, and that blocked a vote for first Australia, and then when Australia would have been knocked out, they would have gone to America. So it was quite an advantage for Qatar to get that vote. We then these stories went on over 4 weeks at the beginning of the World Cup. Because the thing about Qatar is that obviously it's a very wealthy country, and its wealth comes from liquid petroleum gas, and it was going around doing huge trade deals which would benefit the voters. I mean, for example, and there's one the gas deal with Thailand involved a man called Warawai Makudi, who was the FIFA Executive Committee voter at the time. Quite why a FIFA Executive Committee voter was involved in a gas deal, well, you can only guess, and that was just before the vote. And so we did these stories over as I say, about 4 weeks. There are all sorts of other things in the documents. I mean, one of the things about Qatar is that the FIFA inspectors went around all the 9 bidding nations, and the one that came out worse in terms of its ability to put on a World Cup by a long way, and which was a high risk, was of course Qatar. We also found that on the day before the vote, we found a terror report in which there'd been assessment of the terrorist threat, and again Qatar and all the FIFA executive members were warned that Qatar was the worst threat. But they still voted for it anyway, and I think we're starting to understand why they did, because I think. And so, what was FIFA's reaction to this one? We had this summer in which we had absolutely bombarded them with evidence and new information, and the big story at the time, all around the world, was FIFA under pressure, and their reaction to our story was one of more or less absolute silence. It has to be said. Blatter got up, and it was before the World Cup, and he got up in front of the African Congress, because all the congresses of FIFA are held ahead of the World Cup. And he said 2 things, in effect. He said that all these allegations are inspired by racism, and incidentally, I'm going to be standing for president next year, and I'm going to increase all your funds by another 200,000. FIFA's own press officer, we kept bombarding him, but he was a man called Walter Gregario, and Walter could only respond in this fashion. He said, he sent us an email in which he said, "We cannot comment on every single paper you pick out of the hundreds of millions of emails you have, as you say. This could go on and on and on. First, please kindly check all the hundreds of millions of emails you have, send us a summary of your findings, and then you might get a statement from FIFA, but not before you do your homework." What they were doing at the time was hiding behind Michael Garcia's investigation, which, as I said earlier, took 2 years and was sort of coming to fruition. But while this was all happening, it's sort of typical FIFA. While they're pretending that there's nothing wrong, all of the FIFA Executive Committee members arrived in Brazil. And when they went into their rooms, they each had a gift bag, and in the gift bag was a watch for each of them worth $25,000. Now, that same committee had voted in new rules not so long earlier, which said that they should only take gifts of nominal value. Now, so you would have thought that given a gift of $25,000, they would all have handed them back. And of course, they didn't. They just pocketed them. Only 3 members of the executive committee decided in the end to sort of blow the whistle and go to Garcia. Garcia himself didn't do anything about it. He just, seemed natural that, they have rules, but there's one rule for everyone else, and there's another rule for the FIFA Executive Committee. Until we wrote the story, and at that point, Garcia was forced to actually act on the watches. His reaction to our FIFA files back in June, just before the World Cup, was equally bizarre. We thought, here he is. We knew he'd been wandering around the world getting nothing. I mean, basically, he had no power to seize emails, had no particular sort of great sources. So therefore, he was sort of dependent on going to people and saying, I hear there's an allegation you did something corrupt, and did you? And it was as simple as that. It was a very, very sort of toothless investigation. It wasn't getting anywhere, and we knew that before we put out the FIFA files. But we thought actually he would welcome our information, because here we are. We've got loads of documents for you. There's lots for you to get your teeth into. But the very next day, Garcia, rather than take up our information, got up and told everyone that he'd closed his evidence taking part of his investigation. He wasn't taking any more evidence. He was just going to get off and write it, which we found absolutely gobsmacking. We couldn't understand why he would have done it. But he was put under pressure from FIFA, and FIFA just wanted to close it down. They really didn't want to open this all up again. And I think that we can probably explain why. I can explain why later. And so they then started this whole cat and mouse in which Garcia was going to write his report, and he'd deliver it to Judge Eckert in around about September, October. It became clear when we talked to Eckert, and we created quite a fuss about it, that none of this information was ever going to be revealed. So here FIFA were saying, we can't possibly comment on all the allegations that you're raising because we've got this investigation ongoing. And then at the same time, when the investigation was completed, they weren't going to release any of it. And we did actually manage to sort of force their arm on that. And eventually, Judge Eckert did decide to write a summary, which was very much as we sort of thought it would be, which sort of says, well, Qatar and Russia did nothing wrong, but the real villains of the piece were England and Australia, because England got 2 votes and Australia got 1 vote, and they'd actually been quite fair and handed over much of their communications. So there were small things that you could hold both bids to account for, but the big crimes in the bidding were lost completely. I mean, the Russians are almost impossible to investigate because what happened when Garcia went to the Russians. He was told he's not allowed to travel there because of his past as an American prosecutor, and he was told that unfortunately the Russians had worked on computers that had been leased, and they'd given them back to the leasing company. And you know what? All the computers have been wiped, so there was not much that no ground that he could go to. So they did agree in the end. FIFA did agree that they might put out a redacted version of the report, and we always imagine that it will look like this, because they don't have any commitment at all to transparency, and in fact, they suggested they would put out this redacted version back in November last year. It's a year now. We still haven't seen that report, although quite lots happened, I think, in the last year, which is and to understand why it is that FIFA was so reluctant to do anything about any of this evidence, I think you have to look at Sepp Blatter. And what became clear to us when we were researching the book over in late 2014, earlier this year, was that a number of friends of Mohammed bin Hammam told us about a deal, and this was the deal. Back in 2011, when bin Hammam was standing for the presidency against Sepp Blatter, what had happened was that bin Hammam had been suspended because of the bribes he was caught out paying. He was still standing for the presidency, and a couple of days before the election was due to take place, he was called to Blatter's office in FIFA headquarters, and there he found a member of this Qatari royal family, and he was told in no uncertain terms that what he had to do was step out of the presidential race, and in return, Blatter promised to make sure that the Qatar bid was untouched. And if you remember at that time, that was the time when we just released all the information to the parliamentary committee, and the subject of Qatari bribes was raging around the world, and it was very important to him. So we always felt that, as long as Sepp Blatter was in place, the Qatar World Cup 22 would be untouched. And that was one of our revelations in the book, which is this book here, which is called The Ugly Game, the Qatari plot to buy the World Cup. This is how, when we were writing the book, actually, it was sort of becoming increasingly clear that the cracks were opening. All sorts of things were happening. I mean, there was all the big protest about the Qatar World Cup and all the slave labor that was used, and the numbers of people dying, which was extraordinarily high. There was growing sort of insurrection about the fact that the European leagues didn't want the World Cup to be held in the winter, which was the proposal, and of course it is going to be now in an extraordinary move to make way for Qatar. But more than that, FIFA was being hit in its pocket because all the sponsors were starting to make noises, and we sort of felt it just needed one more push. And in a funny way, I suppose we had done it, and we didn't really know that we'd done it. But when we caused the Garcia investigation with our Legends Dinner story, and then it came to fruition in around about October, November last year, it came out. The Garcia report was handed to ECHOT at a time when we created this incredible pressure on FIFA, and FIFA, having looked at some of the allegations in the report, couldn't suppress them. They had to pass them on to criminal authorities. And so some of the allegations in the report were passed on by FIFA to the Swiss police. Now, normally the Swiss police could be depended on to just look at the narrow allegations that they were given. But at the time, FIFA had lost its political goodwill in Switzerland, and there was a real sort of appetite to go and investigate them because they were, around the world, they were becoming this great pariah. And that's exactly what happened. And the Swiss prosecution team sort of went much further than anyone would have expected, and started investigating FIFA itself. And at the same time, another thing that had been going on in tandem to that was that the FBI has started an investigation as well. And this has sort of come out of, it came out of the Eurasian part of the FBI, who had initially, even before the ballot had taken place, had been investigating some Russian money laundering. And FIFA had cropped up in that. As a result of that, the then Attorney General, a man called Eric Holder, was actually at the ballot as a lobbyist for the American bid alongside Bill Clinton. And they watched firsthand as Qatar won, couldn't believe it, came back shaking their heads, and an investigation was started into corruption in FIFA, looking particularly at the Qatar bid initially, by the FBI's, I think it's their Eastern Division, under then just a U.S. attorney, Loretta Lynch. They initially went to our whistleblower and worked out who she was, and her name's known now. She's called Fedra Al-Majid, and they tried to get her to secretly tape record conversations with her former employers at the Qatar bid. They then benefited from the fallout from the Qatar's victory in 2010, because one of the things that had happened was that Chuck Blazer, who's the American FIFA Executive Committee member, had witnessed Mohammed bin Hammam ticking off a list of names of those he believed voted for Qatar during the ballot. As a result of that, he saw Jack Warner's name on it. Now, Jack Warner was for many years Chuck's co-conspirator. They were both from the American Federation, which is CONCACAF. And the two of them fell out badly as a result of that. And then that's what led Chuck Blazer to actually inform on Mohammed bin Hammam when he was making the bribe payments alongside Jack Warner, who'd now become Chuck's enemy. Out of all of that, a great spat started, and as a result of it, the Chuck Blazer's financial records came out. Turned out, of course, Chuck, like Jack, had been stealing for many, many years from CONCACAF and other places. And he had millions. He lived in Trump Tower. He had apartments in Florida. And he had all these millions of dollars of income coming in, but he wasn't paying any tax. And when this was great news for the FBI, who were starting to look at FIFA at the time, because this gave them some leverage over him. And they got Chuck they turned Chuck, made sure he offered him a more lenient sentence, and then wired him up and sent him around to interview lots of FIFA executive types. And some of the information is out now, but actually there's still quite a lot to come from those tapes. So we watch this space; it'll be fascinating. But what happened as a result of all of that was that there was the Swiss police investigation and the FBI investigation came together in April this year, and they did this extraordinary thing. They raided the Hotel Bar au Lac, which is FIFA's sort of hotel headquarters in Zurich, and they arrested 7 people. And out of all of that, at the same time, the Swiss police announced that they are investigating the 2018 and 2022 bids. think it looks unlikely that that the 2018 bid will be looked at because, as I understand it, the Swiss police don't have any information on it because it's so difficult with Russia. But there are a number of things that they're looking at in relation to the 2022 bid, and as are the Americans. And you know, as we found out over the last 4 or 5 months, we've found lots of new allegations emerging, because it wasn't just this World Cup contest to host hosting contests that turned out to be corrupt. It turns out that there were the others in the past were as well, and we write a bit about that in the book. But there's also new information about Germany and how it won 2006, and then there's this extraordinary $10 million payment by the South Africans to Jack Warner and Chuck Blazer and a third FIFA executive member in order to secure the 2010 World Cup. And out of the Swiss investigation, which has been boiling away, came in the end the crucial arrest and questioning, which was of the president, Sepp Blatter, on two things. One is for TV marketing rights that he gave to Jack Warner. As ever, Jack Warner's always at the center of things. The second is an extraordinary 2 million Swiss francs payment he made to Michel Platini. And you see that you see it in the news at the moment. It's looking very much like both Platini and Blatter are likely to get a life ban for that. And I think we're only just starting. And I think it's a funny old thing, because we pushed it a long time. Our investigation was probably about 5 years, and up to a point, I suppose, it sort of ended with a book in which we we collate all these different allegations and all this new evidence and show just how rotten FIFA has been for so long. And to us at the time, it was sort of frustrating, because we felt we'd sort of had pushed them so far, but we weren't getting anywhere. And suddenly, after the arrests, the whole thing is just falling apart. It's just as if there's just fire starting here, there, and everywhere. It doesn't need investigative journalists to add to it at the moment, because it now has a momentum of its own. And we don't quite know where it's going to go. I mean, if you were to ask me what I really felt should happen to FIFA, is I think it actually needs to be scrapped and some new body should start again, because it's so corrupt. And it's fundamentally sort of flawed in the way it's run. Because you have 209 member associations, you have some of the poorest countries in the world, and you also have some of the richest countries. And they all have the same vote. So you have a tiny country in the Caribbean, which has got a population of 5,000, barely plays any football, has one vote in the presidency and other decisions. And then you also have a huge country like Brazil, population, whatever it is, 200, 300 million, has the same one vote. And it needs reforming badly, because what that meant was someone like Sepp Blatter, and before him, the man who sort of invented this, Joel Haviland, could use FIFA's funds, in effect, to buy votes. And that's what he's been doing over the years, and that's how he's kept on to power. The question of whether Blatter was fundamentally corrupt was always difficult for us, because we always could see that he presided over a corrupt regime because he turned a blind eye to all the things that were going on, because all he wanted to do was retain power. Although it now appears that he gave Michel Platini 1.3 million pounds, or 2 million Swiss dollars, at the very time that Platini was threatening to stand against Blatter for the presidency in 2011. And the two, they say it's for a payment for work that Platini did 9 years earlier, and yet there's no contract, there's nothing in the accounts to suggest this. It just doesn't look good, and it looks as if finally the reign of Sepp Blatter is completely over, and it's a good thing. So I stop there. If anyone would like to ask any questions, I'll be delighted to answer any questions. I mean, if anyone wants to talk to me afterwards, I'm very happy to talk about these things. And you may want to talk about other things. I mean, we are obviously an investigative team at the Sunday Times, and we're always interested in stories. So, as much as anything, I would, very much welcome to meet lots of you. But please feel free to ask questions. If there's anyone who would like to ask a question.
Thanks a lot. Do you get any indications of how enthusiastically the Swiss authorities are pursuing their own investigation of what happened to the Americans? Very much they were pushed by the Americans. And secondly, any thoughts on Judge because it seems to me, particularly what we're now hearing about 2006 or so, that his conduct, and particularly Michael Garcia's rejection of what Eckhart said, really deserves some very serious study in the German media, and if that's not taking place, you might question why not. Maybe your colleagues who are doing the work on the Olympic doping might want to join with you in having a look at Judge Eckhart.
It's actually, that's another insight story. It's the Olympic doping. That's what I've been doing over the summer. But when it comes to the Swiss police, I actually do think they have got the bit between the teeth on this, and I do actually think it's quite coincidental that the two investigations come together. And I don't think it is the Americans that are pushing it. I think there's a joint. I mean, you've got the Swiss have really opened it up because they now are getting into all the banking transactions, which FIFA always assumed would just stay secret for years and years. That's why you choose to have bank accounts in Switzerland. It's the idea is that you're not supposed to ever see them. So I actually think, and they are the worst nightmare for FIFA in many ways. I don't quite know what the FBI have got. It's said that there's going to be another big announcement, raid probably, lots of arrests, before February when the FIFA presidential election comes up. When it comes to Judge Joachim Eckhart, I really don't know about him at all. I really don't understand quite what it is. There is a tension that what happened was that Garcia submitted his report to Eckhart. Eckhart wrote this summary. Garcia hated it for whatever reason and decided to resign. What we knew of the report before it went to Eckhart was that actually it was going to recommend that Qatar and Russia were completely cleared and that the worst offenders were England and Australia. That's exactly what Eckhart's summary says. So I don't know where it's particularly different in that respect. I mean, Eckhart is a criminal judge. He's there's no reason to think he's been got to at all. But Blatter and FIFA have had a great sort of ability to manipulate these things over the years, and quite how they may have done this in this case, I don't know. Are there any more questions? David?
I remember reading a story that Platini had possibly received a Picasso.
Yeah, that's one of our stories. So I'd say that the genesis of this story was that the England bid had quite a lot of help from our foreign embassies and our intelligence services when they were going around, and they collected a huge dossier of information. In that information were allegations that the Russians had raided their national museums and had given to take paintings out of some value to give to FIFA executive members who they wanted to vote for them. One of the allegations was that a man called Michel de Herg, who was the Belgium FIFA Executive Committee member, had received a painting. And when we went to him, indeed he had. He got one from the Russian bid, he admitted it, only he put it in the attic, it wasn't worth any money, and could we see it? No, we can't see it, and then strangely got rid of it, and all of those things. And so we never know quite what happened. The same bit of information was that Michel Platini got a Picasso painting, and it came from the same source. So it's valid. Of course, Michel Platini denies absolutely that he got a Picasso, and that's where we are. Should we have the man in the middle there? Oh, our whistleblower. Our whistleblower really was somebody ultimately who was quite a senior figure in world football and just thought it was wrong that Qatar had been given the World Cup and was highly suspicious about the motives of those who'd bought them, and so they just wanted the truth to come out. Well, the UK did all sorts of small things. You know, they what in the past? But there are small things. I mean, like the UK gave handbags to the FIFA executive members' wives. They financed a dinner for $35,000 for Jack Warner, and so there were. I mean, we weren't completely clean. I mean, you know, these things one should have known that they shouldn't have done, but they did. Man over there. Well, the SFO did look. I mean, the Americans are able to do it because they have laws which say, you know, they can prosecute on dollar transactions. So they've been following the dollar all over the place. And actually, to be fair, the Americans' prosecutions are all in the Americas. They're all either sort of North America or South America at the moment, and they're nowhere else. The SFO, when was it? Probably about 5 or 6 months ago. Were asked to have a look at this, and they did, and they found certain suspicious transactions, and they haven't gone any further with it. I think, as I understand it, they then recommended that there wasn't enough for them to go on. So it may well be that some of this money was routed through the English banks, but I don't think we know whether it has or not. And I think that's still out. The jury's still out on that. I mean, from stories I've done in the past, I can see that certain FIFA executive members seem to have got quite a lot of property in the UK, and how they got it, considering they're lowly football officials normally, is questionable. But still, I've not seen any full investigation into that. Does anyone else have a question? Over there. I think it's because it's so hard. I mean, the Russian bid, as we understand it, was staffed by executives from Gazprom who went around making all sorts of offers. So for example, Franz Beckenbauer voted for Russia, and lo and behold, a year later, he has a job as a goodwill ambassador for Gazprom. And there was a very good German documentary did a piece about Russia, which was all about the Cypriot voter, Marius Lefkaritas. he runs a sort of petrol company in Cyprus, and shortly before the bid, Gazprom did quite a big petrol deal with him. But the thing about Russia is they've got the infrastructure, they've got those foreign agents, all of those things. They don't have to go sort of clambering around. It's they've got quite a sophisticated system in place. So I think they're very hard to investigate, and nobody really has got a huge amount of purchase on it. Who knows whether the Russian bid was corrupt? It seems unlikely, given what we know about the FIFA Executive Committee, that the Russians weren't asked for things, because, one of the most astonishing things is that of the 24 people who, when we were originally investigating that committee, 24 Executive Committee members, 13 of them have been suspended or banned or fined as a result of disciplinary offences by the FIFA Ethics Committee. And I think 6 of them are under criminal investigation, and one more has recently been given a suspended sentence. That's Warren Makudi in Thailand. That committee has just got to be the corruptest sporting body ever. Is there any more questions? David again?
Do you expect FIFA to remain in business, or do you expect it to go out of business? Is it reformable?
Well, I would like it to go out of business, I have to say. I just think that a whole new body needs to be set up with new rules and a different structure. I suspect it probably will linger on, because it's a completely divided body, and it's very hard. It would be very hard to sort of kill it in a funny way, because for all that we think FIFA is a sort of byword for corruption, there are lots of football officials in Africa and South America and Asia who think that FIFA is fine, and they'd like to see it carry on as it does, and that it's doing a very good job. So it's very, very hard to have any decision which is unanimous in FIFA. Reputational for the UK in terms of what their bid did. I think the thing is with the England bid, it's fairly minor. And I remember actually when I went to New Zealand to interview I was undercover, so he thought I was a lobbyist. And I was hiring him to be our consultant, a man called Fuzi Maholi, who used to be on the FIFA Executive Committee and was telling me about bids in the past where his friends had he'd been offered money, other people had been offered money for his vote. He didn't take the money, others did. But he made one point about England that is quite simple. The problem with the English is they're not going to win because they don't do the deals. And I don't think we did do the deals at that sort of level. So I suspect that there isn't an awful lot more that would come out about the England bid. I'd be surprised, but you never know, I suppose. Over there. I don't know. I think now Blatter's gone. It's possible. The Swiss police are obviously investigating it, so it's possible. The FBI have more to come out. The FBI have done it sort of chronologically so far. So they've moved up through the years, and we had the last bit was the 2010 World Cup, and they are coming to the 2018 and the 2022 World Cup. So there might be more there. There is actually already enough information out there to take the World Cup from Qatar. It's just a question of will, really. If you looked, all the evidence we produced about Mohammed bin Imam's secret campaign, which in effect did buy the World Cup for Qatar. And then also, if you look at the sort of the legal pact that Qatar did. So before, when we first were working undercover in September 2010, about 3 months before the bid, we were told by a man called Michel Zenrufen that what was happening is that Qatar had got together with... so Mohammed bin Imam had 2 voters who were like right-hand men to him, Hani Rida from Egypt and Makudi from Thailand. Those 3 were going to vote for Spain and Portugal. In return, Spain and Portugal had the Spanish voter Angel Villalona, and they also had the 3 South Americans behind them, a man called Grandona from Argentina, Teixeira, one of the great corrupt men in football, from Brazil, and Leos from Paraguay. So, in effect, 7 were voting for Qatar and 7 were voting for Spain, Portugal, between the 2 bids, the 2018 and 2022 bid. Now, at the time we first did when we first did our story, there was a big FIFA investigation into this. A man called Chris Eaton, who was the FIFA investigator at the time, took charge of that investigation. He didn't find anything. And about a year later, Chris Eaton took a very lucrative job working in Doha. So there was allegedly no pact. And yet, when the voting took place, that's exactly what happened. All those 7 voted for each other. And in fact, they were the only 7 votes that Spain got in the first round. And it's always been denied until this summer when Ricardo Teixeira, who's now had been living in Florida, now gone back to Brazil to get out of the way of the FBI, is now in Brazil being investigated for other offenses, gave an interview in which he said, yeah, that's what happened. We voted, we all voted for Qatar, and Qatar's voters voted for Spain, Portugal. It was a deal, and there was a pact that was arranged. Now, that is precisely against the rules. And it may seem like a technical, geeky point, but what it meant was that Qatar had a base of 7 votes, which it had acquired in a way that the FIFA Executive Committee had specifically said should not be done. So if anyone wanted to look at that, and FIFA seem to have so many cases in the Ethics Committee, they don't seem to be having a look at it at the moment, but that would be ample reason to take it away. So I don't know what's going to happen with Qatar 22. I suspect that if there were ever an attempt to take it away from Qatar, then there'll be an almighty legal battle, but it will be interesting. Hello. Yeah, I think for years and years and years, those bids to host the World Cup have been corrupt, and I think that for years and years. Well, it depends whether the Europeans themselves are above board, doesn't it? And we now know that Michel Platini took £1.3 million from Sepp Blatter. We know that Angel Villa was at the centre of this pact I was just talking about. He's a Spanish voter, and when it came to Garcia investigating that, Villalona, who's now acting president of UEFA, who was a sort of stalwart on the FIFA Executive Committee who had voted in these rules. What did he do? He just said, I'm not actually going to cooperate with you, Michael Garcia. I'm not going to talk to you, which is extraordinary. In any other organisation, he would have been kicked out. The idea that you don't cooperate with an internal disciplinary inquiry is bizarre. But it's FIFA, and he got fined £16,000 for doing it, and that's all. We come to an end, have we?
So thank you very much, Jonathan. It's very good.